Hello, everybody. Hello. I am so glad to see so many happy faces out there. Good evening. I'm Caroline Fredrickson. I'm the president of the American Constitution Society, and I am so pleased to welcome you to the 2016 ACS National Convention. This convention, as we know, so many of you are already done, is a time for us to reconnect, to reflect on the challenges and successes of our past year, and to re-energize for the year ahead. And I don't worry for the energy, because I can sense the energy in this room. We have an amazing evening tonight. So I wanted to just say that we're pleased to be back here in the Capitol Hilton for the 6th straight year, and want to take a moment to give a big thank you to the wonderful hotel staff who are here tonight, represented by Unite Here, Local 25. And I'd also like to thank our convention hosts, Elizabeth Cabraser, Lily Eskelson Garcia, Cecile Richards, and ACS Board Chair Cliff Sloan, and our honorary chairs, Senator Harry Reid, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Senator Patrick Leahy, and Congressman John Conyers. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our sponsors for generously supporting tonight's event. Our underwriters are Berger and Montag, Kellogg, Huber, Hansen, Todd, Evans, and Feigl, Leaf, Cabraser, Heinemann, and Bernstein, Microsoft, SEIU, Skadden, and Wilmer Hale. And our partners, Facebook, Latham & Watkins, the National Education Association, Paul Weiss, Perkins Coie, and Rust Consulting Kinsella Media. Our benefactors, AFSCME, Boies Schiller and Flexner, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Cleary Gottlieb, Cravath, Swain and Moore, Huntington Bank, Jenner and Block, Orrick, Sidley Austin, and Strook, and many others have been great supporters of ACS. So thank all of you for being here tonight. Now, I just want to say this is a particularly special convention for us because this is the year that we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the founding of ACS. And I have been so fortunate to witness ACS's growth from a fledgling organization to the powerhouse of ideas that has become. I'm delighted to say that ACS now has well over 200 student and lawyer chapters, which hold well over 1,000 debates, conferences, and press events across the country every year. At this convention alone, we have students from well over 100 law schools represented. It's this network that all of you make up that has allowed us to become a leader in the progressive legal movement, and I'd like to thank everyone who has helped advance the mission of ensuring that the law is a force of good in the lives of all people. The need for the work of ACS is so evident everywhere you look. We've seen discriminatory anti-LGBT legislation, efforts to suppress the right to vote, and burdensome restrictions on a woman's right to choose. Workers and labor unions continue to face an onslaught of attacks from corporate interests. And the floodgates have been opening even wider as the dark money surges into political and judicial elections, making 2016 a record-breaking year for outside spending. Amid all of this, we all know too well that we have a Supreme Court lacking a justice, that a Senate that will not even consider the nomination of Chief Judge Merrick Garland. And these attempts on fundamental rights, these attacks on fundamental rights and the attempts to weaken our democracy will not go unanswered. Thanks to ACS's work and our phenomenal network of forward-thinking lawyers, judges, law students, and advocates like all of you. And for example, I'd like to mention that ACS, in response to the ceaseless attacks on the right to vote, launched a Voting Rights Institute in partnership with the Campaign Legal Center and Georgetown University Law School to educate attorneys and the public about how to protect our most fundamental civic right. The Voting Rights Institute has trained hundreds of lawyers interested in voting rights advocacy, has provided online resources for advocates litigating voting rights cases, educated the public about threats to the right to vote, and provided a mechanism for the public to report voting rights violations. And I think quite a number of you participated in a training right here today at the beginning of our convention. And ACS has also been active in the effort to demand action from the Senate that has paralyzed the judicial confirmation process from Supreme Court to the district courts. I'd like to thank all the constitutional scholars who wrote letters encouraging the Senate judiciary leaders to engage in good governance, to all the ACS members who've written op-eds about the need for a fully functioning judiciary, and to all attendees who will visit the Supreme Court Vacancy Corner, which is located outside, during this convention to share why you believe that our courts are so important. And with the Supreme Court term coming to a close, there is still so much to do and so much at stake. We await decisions that will determine the ability of colleges and universities to foster a diverse learning environment, affect the ability of women to access reproductive health care, and affect the future of millions of immigrants whose presence, contrary to what some would have us believe, fortifies America and makes this a greater country. So unfortunately, we will be, in one capacity, losing a wonderful advocate in Don Verrilli, who is stepping down from his position as Solicitor General. I know Don hates this, but we have to recognize Don, and he's sitting up here in the front. And I just ask you, I know you already applauded, but let's just do it one more time. Well, I know I don't need to tell this crowd what a remarkable champion for justice Don has been. His phenomenal skills and passion will be greatly missed. But he will not, I know, be on the sidelines in the fight for justice, but just in a different role. And we are so proud of all of your work, and thank you for joining us tonight. As we all know, this is a tumultuous political time. And your presence here shows the determination to ensure that we live in a country that lives up to the Constitution's ideals. So I thank you for being here and for being part of our efforts. Now I have the very special privilege of introducing another extraordinary advocate. Lily Eskelsen Garcia is the president of the National Education Association. Lily began her long and impressive career as a cafeteria lunch worker, moved on to become a kindergarten aide before attending college to obtain a degree in elementary education, and later a master's degree in instructional technology. After only 9 years as a teacher, Lily was named Utah Teacher of the Year, which gave her a platform to speak out against the drastic underfunding of Utah schools. A year later, she was elected president of the Utah Education Association, has been the president of the Utah State Retirement System, president of Children at Risk Foundation, and a member of the White House Strategy Session on Improving Hispanic Education. She was also the first ever Hispanic candidate for Congress in her state. In her efforts to realize the promise of public education for all students, Lily has built alliances with parents, businesses, civil rights organizations, and advocates for the disabled and the poor, all while promoting the belief that educators have a sacred duty to be professionals and care for the whole child. So please join me in welcoming Lily Eskelsen Garcia.
Wow. So I know that you're all terrified. I am a 6th grade teacher. You're sitting up a little straighter. I appreciate that. Eyes up front, boys and girls. I was actually a very good social studies teacher. My kids loved civics. And we could do it by the numbers. That we had one president, that we had 100 members of the Senate, that there were 435 members of Congress, that we had 9 Supreme Court Remember when we had 9 Supreme Court justices? Good times. Yeah. But I am here to do more than give a lesson. It is the honor of my life to be able to introduce to you someone that, well, I just think, I kind of got a girl crush on her, and which is, of course, none of your business. But maybe it is your business. Why? Because she started out as a teacher. She started out as a high school teacher, and I've got to love that because I know what's in a teacher's heart. And then she decided to take that teacher's heart and go to law school, and she developed the mind of a lawyer, and that impresses me. And then she took that teacher's heart and that lawyer's mind, and she put it in an activist's hand because she was born an activist. And this woman has spent her life saying to everyone around her, the only way government works, the only way you get good government, is if you have good people who get into public office, who get into the law, who get into government because they care about the public good. That is what sets few people apart. This is a woman who knows what it's like to be a patriot. That's a good word. When I think of patriot, I think of her. Because for me, I know what democracy looks like. It looks like Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Very much. It is so good to be here, and thank you, Caroline, for inviting me to speak today. Thank you, Lily. It is just terrific to be here. The thing that thrills me the most is to look out into this room and see so many people in the audience today. The American Constitution Society has a vital purpose, and that is to stand up for the rule of law, to stand up for the Constitution, and to stand up against those who would undermine either one of them. That's what we do. And each and every person in this room has committed themselves to that fight. And thank you for that commitment, because I gotta say, we're gonna need you. 4 simple words are engraved above the doors to the United States Supreme Court: equal justice under law. That's supposed to be the basic promise of our legal system, that our laws are just and that everyone will be held equally accountable if they break those laws. Now, look, we haven't always fulfilled those promises, but it is the absolute standard to which we hold ourselves, even when we fall short. And a vital part of that struggle is the fight for a truly professional, independent, and impartial judiciary. Absolutely. A place that is governed not by politics, not by money, not by power, but by those four simple words: equal justice under law. Yes. Now, 3 years ago, I came here to deliver a warning about how that promise is under threat. And I talked pretty bluntly about how we are losing the fight over whether our courts will remain a neutral forum, faithfully interpreting law and dispensing fair and impartial justice, or whether the rich and powerful interests will completely capture the judicial branch. I talked about how year after year, for more than 30 years now, powerful interests have worked to rewrite the law and tilt the courts to favor billionaires and giant corporations. We talked about cases that protect giant businesses from accountability, cases that made it harder for individuals to get into court, cases that gutted long-standing protections for consumers to keep them from being cheated, and cases like Citizens United, which unleashed an avalanche of billionaire super PAC dollars and secret corporate money in a mad dash to tilt the rest of government in favor of the wealthy. And today, I am here to update that warning. Because what we've seen over the past 3 years, accelerating over the past 3 months and even the last 3 weeks, is alarming. Powerful interests are now launching a full-scale assault on the integrity of the federal judiciary and its judges. Now, this assault has 2 major elements. First, tearing down our centuries-old process for appointing judges. And second, viciously attacking judicial nominees, potential nominees, and even sitting federal judges at the first sign that they might put the rule of law above devotion to the rich and powerful. Now, earlier this week, I released a comprehensive report on the Republican campaign of obstruction against President Obama's nominees. It details how Senate Republicans have delayed or blocked votes on key nominations throughout the entire Obama presidency. The purpose of this obstruction is to try to hold open federal positions for as long as possible. The purpose is also to hamstring the president's ability to protect consumers and workers, to hold large corporations accountable, to promote equality. In other words, to undermine the fundamental principle of equal justice under law. The centerpiece of that strategy has been a blockade of federal judicial appointments, and it is much bigger than just the United States Supreme Court. From the day President Obama was sworn in, Senate Republicans have used every procedural tool at their disposal to try to slow down his nominees. They spent months abusing the filibuster in a naked effort to preserve a right-wing majority on the D.C. circuit. And after capturing the Senate in 2015, they've just slowed judicial confirmations down to a trickle. Judicial emergencies multiply, cases pile up, courts are starved for help. And now the Supreme Court of the United States sits paralyzed, unable to deal with its most challenging cases, all because extremist Republicans who reject the legitimacy of President Obama are determined to make certain our courts advance the agenda only of the wealthy and the powerful. It is outrageous, and it is up to us to fight back. Senate Republicans, do your job. Give district court nominees their votes. Do your job. Give circuit court nominees their votes. And do your job. Give Merrick Garland his vote. That's right. The nominations blockade is just the first part of the assault on the judiciary. But there is a second, even uglier line of attack: intimidation. Now, justice demands a judiciary that's made up of independent lawyers who can provide insight and expertise from every corner of the profession. But Senate Republicans and their big business allies don't like nominees whose resumes reflect insufficient devotion to the interests of the rich and the powerful. So they smear them. Defense lawyers, public interest lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers. Nominees with these professional experiences are just regularly slandered. Their integrity is questioned. And scores of Republicans just automatically line up to oppose them. Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama has attacked the integrity of several of President Obama's nominees. For what? For having some association with the American Civil Liberties Union. Apparently being connected to an organization whose principal purpose is to defend rights guaranteed by the Constitution is an automatic disqualification. Sessions vowed that the nominations process would become, and I got his quote here, a more contentious matter if we keep seeing the ACLU chromosome as part of this process. And he meant it. During her confirmation hearing to be a district court judge this year, Senator Sessions just plain insulted Paul Azinas, a former federal public defender and a civil rights lawyer who worked on cases, among others, of police abuse. So he asked the question whether or not she could assure the police officers that might be brought before your court that they'll get a fair day in court and that your history would not impact your decision making. I just want you to guess how many times Senator Sessions has questioned a fancy corporate defense lawyer, asking if they would assure victims of fraud or people poisoned by toxic wastes or people injured by shoddy products or employees who were fired illegally because they tried to join a union, if they would get a fair day in court. Judge Zenas was rated unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association, yet she was barely confirmed with nearly 36 Republican senators voting against her. This approach is corrosive to the legal profession. It is corrosive to our courts. It is corrosive to the rule of law. And it is the responsibility of every lawyer, no matter who their clients are, to stand up and fight back. The attacks around the current Supreme Court vacancy have been even uglier. And at one point, Senator John Cornyn, the number 2 Republican in the Senate from the state of Texas, announced that any nominee, this is any nominee, put forward by President Obama would be beaten like a piñata. And his right-wing billionaire and big business allies, they've actually made good on that threat. When rumors, just rumors, circulated that Jane Kelly, a highly respected federal judge, might be under consideration, the Judicial Crisis Network, which is this shadowy right-wing group that's financed with dark money from the billionaire Koch brothers, this group ran television ads attacking her for her service to the nation as a federal public defender. Now, as you all know, the president eventually nominated Merrick Garland, a judge that is so revered for his professionalism that days before he was announced, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch called him a fine man who the president could easily name to fill the vacancy. And then what happened? Scores of Republican senators refused to even meet with him. The Judicial Crisis Network started again, spending millions of dollars on television ads to demean this man. The NFIB, a right-wing lobbying group that claims to speak for small businesses but is actually swimming in cash from conservative billionaires, announced that it would oppose Garland's nomination because in cases involving federal agencies, the judge ruled in their favor 77% of the time. Now, that's a punchline a room full of lawyers will appreciate, because every lawyer in this room knows that federal law requires judges to defer to most agency actions. But apparently, it doesn't matter anymore whether or not Judge Garland follows the law. What matters is that he doesn't bend the law to suit giant corporations. Judge Garland is not a politician. He is a judge with an unimpeachable record of putting the law first. And for that sin, he faces a nonstop national campaign of slime. He faces historic disrespect from the Republicans who control the Senate. It is despicable, it must end, and we must end it. The goal here is pretty straightforward. It's to tilt the game, and it's working. 86% of President Obama's judicial nominees have either worked as a corporate attorney, a prosecutor, or both, while less than 4% have worked as lawyers in public interest organizations. You know, professional diversity is missing from the federal bench, and justice suffers for it. But even disqualifying judges based on their professional background isn't enough for Donald Trump. Trump tells everyone who will listen that he is a great businessman. But let's be honest, he is just a guy who inherited a fortune and kept it rolling along by cheating people. And you know, when that's your business model, sooner or later you're going to run into legal trouble. And Donald Trump has run into a lot of legal trouble. Oh yes, Trump University, which his own former employees refer to as one big fraudulent scheme. Now, many of Trump University's victims ended up deep in debt, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and no way to pay it off. Trump's employee playbook said, look for people with financial problems because they make good targets. He even encouraged his sales force to go after elderly people who were trying to create a little financial security because Trump figured they were vulnerable. Now, I taught law for more than 30 years, and you can ask any lawyer in America, and they will tell you that sounds a lot like fraud. And I'm just saying. And by the way, that is exactly what Donald Trump is being sued for. He's being sued for fraud and worse, for targeting the most vulnerable people he could find, lying to them, taking all their money, and leaving them in debt. Now, some of these people are fighting back because in America, we have the rule of law. And that means no matter how rich you are, no matter how loud you are, no matter how famous you are, if you break the law, you can be held accountable, even if your name is Donald Trump. Yeah. But Trump doesn't think those rules apply to him. So at a political rally 2 weeks ago, and almost daily since then, the presumptive Republican nominee for President of the United States has savagely attacked Gonzalo Curiel, the federal judge presiding over his case. He's explained, we are in front of a very hostile judge, Trump said. Frankly, he should recuse himself. He has given us ruling after ruling, negative, negative, negative. Understand what this is. Trump is criticizing Judge Curiel for following the law instead of bending it to suit the financial interests of one wealthy and oh so fragile defendant. also whined that he's being treated unfairly because the judge happens to be, we believe, Mexican. And when he got called out, he doubled down by saying, "I'm building a wall. It's an inherent conflict of interest." He has personally directed his army of campaign surrogates to step up their own public attacks on Judge Curiel. He's even condemned federal judges who are Muslim on the disgusting theory that Trump's own bigotry compromises the judge's neutrality. You just can't make this stuff up. Now, like all federal judges, Judge Curiel is bound by the Federal Code of Judicial Ethics not to respond to these attacks. Trump is picking on someone who is ethically bound not to defend himself. Exactly what you would expect from a thin-skinned racist bully. Now, Judge Curiel can't respond, but we can. We can tell his story. Gonzalo Curiel was born in Indiana, not Mexico, to immigrant parents who worked hard their entire lives and who were handed nothing. He went to Indiana University for undergrad, and then he went there for law school. For 13 years, he worked as a federal prosecutor in Southern California, fighting the Mexican drug cartels as a leader of that region's narcotics enforcement division. He collaborated with top Mexican officials to disrupt the culture of corruption between the Mexican government and the most powerful and deadly cocaine smugglers in North America. And the effort was pretty impressive. On both sides of the border, money launderers, street gangs, assassins were arrested and prosecuted. But that success came at great cost. Witnesses were killed. Mexican officials were murdered. Judge Curiel himself was the target of an assassination plot, and he spent the better part of a year living officially in hiding under the protection of the U.S. Marshals. Later, after his years of service as a prosecutor, Judge Curiel was appointed to the California state courts by a Republican governor who calls him an American hero. He was nominated to the federal bench by a Democratic president, and he was confirmed by a voice vote in the Senate. That's what kind of a man Judge Curiel is. What kind of a man is Donald Trump? Donald Trump says Judge Curiel should be ashamed of himself. No, Donald, you should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed. Ashamed for using the megaphone of a presidential campaign to attack a judge's character and integrity simply because you think you have some God-given right to steal people's money and get away with it. You shame yourself and you shame this great country. Donald Trump says they ought to look into Judge Curiel because what Judge Curiel is doing is a total disgrace. No, Donald, what you are doing is a total disgrace. Race baiting a judge who spent years defending America from the terror of murderers and drug traffickers simply because long ago his family came to America from somewhere else. You, Donald Trump, are a total disgrace. Judge Curiel is one of countless American patriots who has spent decades quietly serving his country, sometimes at great risk to his own life. Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone and who serves no one but himself. That's right. And that is just one of the many reasons he will never be President of the United States. But here's the thing. In spite of these shameful attacks, nobody doubts that Judge Curiel will continue to preside over Trump's case as a fair and neutral judge. Because Judge Curiel is a lawyer with integrity, and that's what lawyers with integrity do. Judge Curiel has survived far worse than Donald Trump. He has survived actual assassination attempts. He will have no trouble surviving Donald Trump's nasty temper tantrums. You know, when first asked, though, about whether he would condemn Trump's comments about Judge Curiel, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, said, well, gee, you know, Donald Trump is certainly a different kind of candidate. And then after days of pressure, McConnell finally said, attacking the judge is stupid and that Trump should, quote, get on script. What script is that exactly? And where do you suppose that Donald Trump got the idea that he can personally attack judges, regardless of the law, whenever they don't bend to the whims of billionaires and big businesses? Trump isn't a different kind of candidate. He's a Mitch McConnell kind of candidate. Yes. He is exactly the kind of candidate you'd expect from a Republican Party whose script for several years has been to execute a full-scale assault on the integrity of our courts, blockading judicial appointments so Donald Trump can fill them, smearing and intimidating nominees who do not pledge allegiance to the financial interests of the rich and powerful. That's the kind. Now, Trump is also House Speaker Paul Ryan's kind of candidate. Paul Ryan condemned Donald Trump's campaign for its attacks on Judge Curiel's integrity. Great. Where's Paul Ryan's condemnation of the blockade, the intimidation, the smears, and the slime against the integrity of qualified judicial nominees and Judge Garland? Where is he? Yeah. Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell want Donald Trump to appoint the next generation of judges. They want those judges to tilt the law in favor of big businesses and billionaires like Trump. They just want Donald Trump to quit being quite so vulgar and obvious about it. Yep. So look, Donald Trump chose racism as his weapon, but his aim is exactly the same as the rest of the Republicans. Pound the courts into submission for the rich and the powerful. Senator McConnell recently said he's, quote, pretty calm about Donald Trump because what protects this country against big mistakes being made is the structure, the Constitution, the institutions. Mitch McConnell is 100% wrong. Our democracy does not sustain itself. Our Constitution does not sustain itself. The rule of law does not sustain itself. There have always been those with money and power who think that the rules shouldn't apply to them, those who would pervert our system of government to serve their own ends. They've tried it before, and they're trying it now. And all that is required for the rule of law and our independent judiciary to collapse is for good people to stand by and do nothing. Now is not the time to stand by. Now is the time to stand up. Now is the time to say no. Not here, not in these United States of America. No. We are not a nation that disqualifies lawyers and judges from public service because of race or religion or gender, or because they haven't spent their entire careers representing the rich and the powerful. We are the nation of John Adams, a lawyer who defended the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre and then went on to serve as President of the United States. We are the nation of Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer who defended accused killers and then went on to serve as President of the United States. We are the nation of Thurgood Marshall, a lawyer who fought for racial equality and then went on to serve in the Supreme Court of these United States. We are the nation of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a lawyer who fought for gender equality and went on to serve in the Supreme Court of these United States. That is who we are. And we will not allow a small, insecure, thin-skinned, wannabe tyrant or his allies in the Senate to destroy the rule of law in the United States of America. We will not. We will not. You bet. You bet. We are ready for this fight because it is time to fight again, as it has been time to fight in every generation, for those 4 simple words that define the promise of our legal system: equal justice under law. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will resume momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will continue shortly. Please welcome former ACS board member Ron Klain. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you. My name is Ron Klain. I'm an ACS advisory board member. And the craziest thing I've ever done in my life, other than taking on the Ebola response, was agreeing to appear at a podium between Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden. This week we celebrate the 15th anniversary of ACS, but it's also an anniversary time for me too, because it was 30 years ago this month that I joined the staff of our special speaker tonight, Joe Biden. And over those 30 years, I've had the honor of working with Supreme Court justices, attorneys generals, senators, congressmen, 2 presidents, but there's no one who I've learned more from or admired more than Joe Biden. He taught me everything I know about being a public servant, about how to harness the law for public good, and how to do the most important job I will ever have, being a father. I can never do justice to what Joe Biden has done for or meant to me, but I do want to offer some words tonight about what Joe Biden has done and meant for the cause of justice. Faced with an array of options at the start of his career, Joe Biden chose to become a public defender in the late 1960s, working in Wilmington. Working in Wilmington, a city divided bitterly over civil rights and still smoldering from riots and unrest. And in an unbelievable poetic twist, 40 years later, on the eve of Inauguration Day 2009, he stood on a train platform in that same city, overlooking those same neighborhoods, as a train bearing our first ever African-American president-elect stopped to pick him up and bring him on a journey here with that president-elect to change our country. What a partnership it has been, what an 8 years it has been. Thanks in no small part to Vice President Joe Biden. The most diverse appointees ever to the federal bench, the Lilly Ledbetter Act, the Affordable Care Act, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Dodd-Frank Law, marriage equality, the law of the land, Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Elena Kagan, and Justice Merrick Garland on the way. But these past 8 years are only a part of a career of historic achievements for the law and the rule of law by Joe Biden as a senator and the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We live in a country with a federal law to combat violence against women because of Joe Biden. We live under a Constitution that was safeguarded from a dizzying array of right-wing attempts to amend it in the 1980s and the 1990s because of Joe Biden. And for a generation, we were blessed by a Supreme Court where critical 5-4 decisions were shaped by Anthony Kennedy and not Robert Bork because of Joe Biden. In closing, I just want to say that our living Constitution has many protectors, many heroes who've made a critical difference at one moment or on one issue. But it is hard to think of any single lawyer, statesman, or leader who has done as much in as many different ways, in as many different areas to protect our Constitution, to give us a more perfect union than our special guest tonight. So please join me in welcoming a man who has played such a big role in giving us our living Constitution with the hope for equality, liberty, and dignity for all, my friend, our Vice President, Joe Biden.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're very gracious. Please, thank you. Thank you. Let me say what a delight it is to be here with all of you, and including those of you who are stuck in Virginia back there. I don't know. I don't know how the hell you got the cheap seats, but I tell you, I thank you very much. There's only a few things I've learned in all the years I've been here in Washington. But one I learned for certain. If you want to see your popularity soar, acknowledge and announce you're not running for president. It really is amazing what it does. It's just, if I'd known this, I would have announced it every year for the last 35 years. But thank you. I have had presumption me to say that one talent that is as good or exceeds anyone else who's ever had my job, and that is I've been able to identify and find and pick and convince people brighter than me to join me. And I mean that sincerely. The two people with the finest minds that I have ever met in my life are Ron Klain and my son Hunter, in terms of just steel-trapped minds. I've never met a man or a woman any brighter than Ron Klain. And that's been a great advantage to me from the time he was a kid, and I mean a kid. I hired him. He came down to do his third year from Harvard at Georgetown, graduating from Harvard, because his wife graduated a year ahead of him and came to work for a major law firm down here. And he was recommended to me then. He clerked for the Supreme Court, and everyone thought I was crazy when I asked him to come be chief counsel for the Judiciary Committee. I may have been the second youngest senator ever elected, but I think he's the youngest person ever to head up be chief counsel for the Judiciary Committee. And he has been a brilliant advisor. He's been a brilliant writer, and he's been a brilliant strategist. And so if there is anything in that tenure of my service that is worth noting, it's in significant part because Ron Klain was by my side, and I mean that sincerely. So Ron, thank you very much for the introduction. Solicitor General Varelli is here. Solicitor General, where are you? I can't see you. There you are. Stand up, man. Stand up. I'm sorry, the lights are so bright, I wasn't sure. I want to thank you, and I mean this sincerely, for your dedicating your entire career. That's not hyperbole. Your entire career to the cornerstone of this democracy, and that is the rule of law. There's a reason why so many, you're the longest serving, and so many presidents have turned to you. You have unimpeachable integrity, you have a brilliant mind, and you've demonstrated just an unyielding commitment to the document that you helped interpret or enforce by arguing for the government. And so I want to thank you for the service to the country, but equally as importantly, as Ron can tell you and others who work with me, I judge the genuineness, I mean this sincerely, the genuineness of a man or a woman with whom I've served either in appointed or elective office by how they conduct themselves when they leave that office, to find out whether it was real or whether it was for some political gain. And your continued commitment to the rule of law, your involvement in this organization, which is, I realize its tenure is not as long as the other outfit. But by the way, we talked about it early on, is badly needed. You are badly, badly, badly needed. And you're filling, no, it really is important. I know it sounds like I'm just trying to be nice. I'm not. I genuinely mean it. The problem is no one ever doubts that I mean what I say, but the problem is I sometimes say all that I mean. And I mean it. You are really very, very much needed. And thank you. Thank you all for the role you play. It is true, I came back from law school 812 years ago in 1968, and my city, part of it had been burned to the ground. The city of Wilmington, Delaware is the only city in America since the Civil War occupied by the military for a total of 9 months. National Guard with drawn bayonets, federal on every single corner in my city, and I had terrible grades in law school, but I was a pretty good communicator. I won the International Moot Court competition, a few other things, and I talked myself into getting a job with a quote white shoe law firm that was the oldest law firm in the state of Delaware. And after a case in federal court, and it was a fine firm, where we were defending a major oil company, and we won. And I had written before I got admitted to the bar. Those days you took the bar in September. It's still that way in Delaware. You take it in September. You don't get your results until December. It's given once a year. But I was sitting in the second chair with a senior partner. I wrote a brief for a directed verdict in this case, and we won. And it was reason to celebrate, but I looked over at the defendant and I thought, oh God, we upheld the law, but this poor kid is in real bad shape. He was injured cleaning out a containment vessel in an oil company. And the senior partner, who was a good man, DuPont, invited me to go to lunch at the Wilmington Club. That is in Delaware. There were no Catholics or blacks or Jews allowed in that club, and it was considered a great honor for me to go to the Wilmington Club. I demurred, and I walked out of the courtroom, walked across Rodney Square. If any of you had the corporate cases in Delaware, you know what I mean, across from the federal courthouse. Went to the basement of a building that was catty corner, walked into the public defender's office. There's a guy named Frank Kearns. And I said, Frank, I'd like to come to work for the public defender's office. He said, don't you work for Prickett? I said, yes. He said, are you crazy? From that moment on, my judgment has been questioned by everyone in the state of Delaware. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. But I learned early on, man, what you've all learned. There's a lot of people who are successful and not happy. If you want to be successful and happy, work like hell and do what you believe in. And that's what all of you do, and that's why you're involved in society. Apparently, I have not made many bones about it. I am a fan of Elizabeth Warren. She's a great personal friend, and I missed her speech before you tonight, but I got to see her outside before we left, and we compared notes on a number of things. And she told me, just go up and say thank you and leave. Look, I know you asked me here tonight to speak about the unprecedented dysfunction that the Senate is literally spreading to a third branch of government, our highest court. But there is a fundamental issue that I'd like to raise briefly, which I think is related to the issue, before I begin specifically on the refusal to hold a hearing for Chief Judge Merrick Garland. And that is that I believe that, and I have not been one, and Ron can tell you, I'm not really big on engaging in, even if it's justified, attacking another, an opponent in a campaign or being negative, but we've sort of crossed the line here. The Republican presidential nominee, I believe, and I mean this literally, this is not a political point, I think his conduct is literally undermining and threatening and potentially doing damage to the constitutional imperative of an independent judiciary that the American people can have faith in. It matters. It matters that the people have faith in the impartiality of the court. Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 78, he said, the complete independence of the courts of justice is peculiarly essential for a limited constitution. To guarantee that independence, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, to protect against political pressure, the framers included the Emoluments Clause, the Compensation Clause, which restricts the ability of either branch of government to reduce a judge's compensation while they're in office, life tenure, removal only by impeachment, and a supermajority impeachment in the United States Senate. Pretty bold and provocative at the time statements of, we expect this branch of government to be co-equal, independent, and it's essential that its believability, there's confidence of the people. It's like Mussolini's comment, how many regiments does the Pope have? Well, what does the court have? What does it have? It has its reputation that it is in fact impartial. That is in fact prepared to rule on the merits. That it is not subject to intimidation. That's a precious commodity that in our separation of powers, the court cannot afford to have undermined. All these protections were designed to do two things: reinforce in the minds of the public the absolute impartiality of the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court in particular, and protect the federal judiciary from being able to be influenced by either of the political branches. The framers gave concrete substance to the idea that ours is, as Chief Justice Marshall put it, a government of laws and not of men. It sounds almost like a high school civics class, but it's real. It's consequential. It really matters. Look at the length even a divided court has gone to over our history on extremely divisive subjects to make sure, even though they had enough votes, to get a preponderance beyond a single vote so that they would say to the country, this is the law of the land. You know, the fact is that one of the founding fathers, in my view, did not think, to quote a perceptive commentator who wrote just a couple days ago, the federal courts, litigation in the federal courts is not deal-making by another means. Surely the framers of our Constitution did not envision a presidential candidate of one of the major political parties personally attacking a sitting federal judge as the nominee or the presumptive nominee of a major party, attacking a federal judge because that judge ruled against the candidate in his private capacity as a citizen in a civil case. For a candidate to call a judge a hater, a total disgrace, to quote him, because he allowed people claiming to have been victimized by the candidate in his capacity as a private businessman to proceed, and because the judge dares to unseal some documents, which is in his power to do, detailing their victimization. I don't think the framers envisioned a presidential candidate accusing a judge of being incapable of reaching a fair decision because of his ethnic descent, because he was Hispanic or anything else, because he was from Tennessee or because he was from Delaware, because he was or she was anything identifiable as distinct from who the candidate was. Because, he says, the judge ruled against him in light of his anti-Mexican proposals. Mr. Trump isn't unique in attempting to intimidate the federal judiciary in a case. Other private citizens have tried to pressure the judiciary from time to time, but not private citizens who are placed in close range of the White House by one of our great political parties. It's one thing for a private citizen to attempt to throw his economic or political weight around as an unelected official, to try to influence, help him demolish his adversary, a phrase often used by this particular fellow, in a judicial proceeding. It's quite another thing for the presumptive candidate of a major party to do the same thing. And up to now, you may say, well, Joe, and folks, I have not been out responding to, in my capacity as vice president, to anything that Mr. Trump has said. But it's my view that a presidential candidate who publicly attacks a sitting federal judge who ruled in a way that was against his own economic interests cannot be trusted to respect the independence of the judiciary as a president. Again, you may view this as, I'm sure, for those who are saying, and with good reason, well, I think that's a particularly harsh judgment. But there's no real connection here. Let's look at what that presumptive nominee said. His own words. After calling the judge presiding over a fraud suit against him a total disgrace, Mr. Trump said, and I quote, these are his exact words, but, quote, but we will come back in November. Wouldn't that be wild if I'm president and I come back and do a civil case? He went on to say, and I'm quoting, wouldn't it be wild as president to come back in November to do a civil case? How can that be interpreted in any other way than as a direct threat. These are words of someone who sees our federal judiciary not as an independent branch of government, but as a tool for him to manipulate so he can do what he calls deal with the laws of our country. These are words, in my view, of one who would defy the courts if they ruled against him as president. Not just in a business case, but a case challenging government abuse of power. Raising the specter of, quote, coming back in November, quote, doing a civil case from the Oval Office is not so veiled a threat. It's a direct threat. And to use the office of the presidency, were he to acquire it, to intimidate and undermine an independent judiciary would be blatantly unconstitutional abuse of power. Either Mr. Trump, which is possible, doesn't understand. I mean that sincerely. He's a bright guy. I'm not saying that. I'm not pretending but he either doesn't understand because this is a realm in which he's never dealt before, or he doesn't care. That it would border on an impeachable offense for a president actually to use the great powers of the office to attempt to undermine a federal judge by placing pressure on that judge in any case, especially one the president has, in this case, a personal financial stake. This kind of conduct is pernicious and unprecedented, and the legal profession should not remain silent, should not put up with it. As one prominent conservative legal commentator put it this way, this behavior in a president smacks of authoritarianism and tyranny. I agree. I agree with that commentator. You all know this as well or better than I do. Our founders created an independent judiciary because, as Hamilton wrote in Federal 78, quoting Montesquieu, there is no liberty if the power of judging is not separated from the legislative and executive powers. I find Donald Trump's conduct in this regard reprehensible, evidenced by the bipartisan condemnation of the action for what it is, a dangerous attack on a vital pillar of democracy, the independent judiciary, by threats of intimidation, and undercutting the legitimacy of a judge by suggesting that because of his heritage, he's incapable of being fair. In addition to this, it is racist. In addition to this. But it's not the racism that frightens me. We've dealt with racists before. It's the potential impact on the court. And I might add a friendly note to my Republican friends, many of them longtime colleagues in the Senate. They assail Trump's unacceptable and wrong sense of the judiciary, yet refuse to confirm a judge of unquestionable credentials to the Supreme Court so that Mr. Trump can fill that vacancy. If he were to win. The failure of my friends, and by the way, it's not a joke. It drives, as I can see some of the White House senior personnel here, it even drives them crazy. I have so many Republican friends. No, you think I'm joking. If you notice, as they'll tell you, anytime we have a crisis, send Joe. It's like that old commercial for Life cereal. Mikey will eat it, send Joe. It's because with all this dysfunction, I still genuinely respect the Senate. It's the greatest honor of my life have served in the United States Senate as long as I have. And the vast majority of my Republican colleagues know better. This is an age of intimidation by gigantic contribution capability from certain areas and because of the consequence of gerrymandering. But the bulk, the reason I don't lose faith is the bulk know better. The bulk know better. The failure of the Senate Republicans, though, to even hold a hearing on an eminently qualified Chief Judge Merrick Garland, it has its own grave, practical, and consequential constitutional consequences. When our framers drafted the Constitution, they envisioned separateness but interdependence, autonomy but reciprocity. That's what they envisioned. Otherwise, there's no way these three equal branches of government could function for the well-being of the republic. It's just as Robert Jackson wrote, while the Constitution diffuses power, the better to secure liberty, it also contemplates that practice will integrate and disperse powers into a workable government. He goes on to say, it enjoins upon its branches separateness but interdependence, autonomy but reciprocity. In 7 years as Vice President of the United States and 36 years as United States Senator, half of those as either the ranking member or chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I've seen the spirit of interdependence and reciprocity work, but I've never seen it at a lower ebb. Not among our people, but among our government, in our government. The bonds that held together our diverse republic for the past 229 years are at least temporarily being frayed. Article 1 of the Constitution clearly states, whenever there is a vacancy for the one court specified in the Constitution, the Supreme Court, the President shall, not may, shall appoint someone to fill that vacancy with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. President Obama fulfilled his constitutional responsibility. He sought the advice of members of the Senate, including Republican members. He didn't get much feedback, but he chose the course of moderation. I will not take the time to list the number of senior Republicans who have been flattering in the past about Merrick Garland, a man that Ron and I and many of you have known for many years. Matter of fact, the criticism the president got is on the left for choosing moderation. With Ron's help, I wrote a long piece, the American Bar Association meeting back in when was it? I'm trying to think of when Bork was. In 1917. Talking about how, what the role of the Senate was and what advice and consent meant. Arguing in that, a number of law review articles we wrote, arguing that the president should seek the advice. He needs the consent, but he should seek the advice. And the more divided the government, the more appropriate it is for the Senate to raise its head, because it has just as much of a right to determine who should be in the court as the president. The president is to propose. The Senate dispose of the proposal. Yet the Republicans in the Senate have totally abdicated their responsibility by refusing even to hold a hearing in the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, which it's not required to hold a hearing under the Constitution. For the longest time, none were held. Folks, as the old joke goes, I've been in the majority, I've been in the minority, I've been in the majority. The majority's better. But I really do, I think most people would acknowledge, I really do have a good relationship with both sides of the aisle when I was there and since I left. But I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like this. The dysfunctional Congress is beginning to undermine the norms of how we conduct ourselves as a government. It's not only in violation of the notion of fairness, but it's in violation of their constitutional responsibility. And it jeopardizes the highest court in the nation being infected with the same dysfunction that is not only recognized by the American people, but recognized by heads of state everywhere I go. I think the White House staff here to tell you, close to the president, will tell you that I've traveled over 1,100,000 miles. And the reason I go for the president, I know these heads of state personally, and they know when I speak for the president. It's an advantage the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense doesn't have. That's the purpose. And I'll work out an agreement. And you know, I'll reach across the table and shake hands. And here's what they'll say to me. Not a joke. All right, Mr. Vice President, whether I'm in China, whether I'm in Ukraine, whether I'm in Japan, whether I'm in any European country, here's what they'll say. Not a joke. I'll hold their hand and they'll say, shaking hands, and they say, but can you deliver? Not does the president mean it. Not do you mean it. But every deal requires some give. So you're asking me to go out there and support this. I'm going to take some heat to my people for doing it. And I'm not sure whether you'll be able to deliver. I know you mean well. That's how deep the dysfunction of the Congress has spread. Let me be clear. What you all know, advice and consent includes consulting and voting. And nobody has suggested, particularly me, that any senator has to vote yes on any particular nominee. Voting no is their right and their option. It's an option of every senator to be able to exercise the right to vote no. But saying nothing, seeing nothing, reading nothing, hearing nothing, and deciding in advance to do nothing before the president even names a nominee is not an option our founders contemplated. Or, I would argue, or one that the Constitution leaves open. In my time as the ranking member or chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I presided over 8 justices, 9 total nominees to the Supreme Court. More than anyone alive, I'm embarrassed to say. I've supported most, I've voted against some. But every single nominee got a hearing. Every single nominee got out of committee to the Senate floor. Even those nominees who did not receive a majority vote in the committee, because I believe the Constitution says the Senate shall advise and consent, not the Judiciary Committee. Every single nominee, including Justice Kennedy in an election year, got an up and down vote by the United States Senate. Not much of the time, not most of the time, every single time. Now, unable to square their unprecedented conduct, which they began to call the Biden rule, until they realized what the Biden rule is, the Constitution. My friends, and they really are my friends, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley. My friends are now trying another tact. They ask, what difference does it make whether there are 8 or 9 members of the court? By the way, at one point we had 8 members in our history. One point there were 8. There's not always been 9. But I believe, and I'm sure you do, that it makes a great deal of difference. We all know that the Supreme Court's rulings make a significant difference in the everyday lives of the American people. More than 2 centuries ago, Justice John Marshall famously declared the court, quote, has the duty, not has the right, has the duty to say what the law is. Not an opinion, a duty. The Supreme Court has a solemn duty in disabling the court, which is so clearly ideologically divided at this moment, as it has been in other times in our history, by keeping a seat vacant for hundreds of days, because that's what it'll end up being if we don't get a vote this year, matters not just because of the uncertainty it perpetuates, but because of the way it fractures our country. None other than Justice Scalia wrote, if you have 8 justices in a case, it raises, he said, the possibility that by reason of a tie vote, the court will find itself unable to resolve the significant legal issues presented by the case. We've seen it already, just in the past few months. Pressing controversial issues that prompted the court to grant review in the first place. In most of those cases, because of different decisions in the different circuits, now remain unresolved. Issues the court believe are too important to leave in limbo are left in limbo, suspended in midair. A 4-4 court, which may be functioning fine in the narrow sense that a majority of cases are able to be decided, has many deleterious effects. Increased litigation cost and delays. Justice delayed, justice denied, so the burden falling more heavily on average Americans than on those with deep pockets able to decide which district to move on and move in. Different rulings in different parts of the country. In such a divided court, leaves different interpretations of the law to stand in different states, creating confusion and uncertainty. It's already happened. And keep in mind, we have another entire term of this potential confusion if the vote is not allowed this year. Anybody who thinks that whatever the next president is, and God willing, in my view, will be Secretary Clinton, but whoever the next president is, no, I don't say that for political reasons, but whoever it is, even if it is a Democrat, the idea this will be brought up within a month or 2 or 3 is highly unlikely. Even in a functioning system, it averages over 2 months. So it's critical we have a fully staffed court that can resolve important decisions. If the conflicts between the federal courts of appeals are allowed to stand, we end up with a patchwork of the Constitution and federal law inconsistent with equal justice and equal application of law in America. Federal laws that apply to the whole country will be constitutional in some parts, but unconstitutional in others. That could mean claims of race or sexual discrimination could come out one way in California or Arizona, another way next door in Utah or Colorado. Claims of government interference with religion could have one fate in Ohio and Iowa and another fate in Illinois and Wisconsin. Claims of unlawful policing might be resolved by one standard in Nebraska and another next door in Kansas. I spoke of this 2 months ago at Georgetown Law. And just in the intervening weeks, there have been important cases in which the justices have basically decided not to decide. I don't have to go through those cases. You know them as I do. Just ask the Solicitor General. He knows them all by heart. The meaning and extent of our federal Constitution, our constitutional rights, freedom of speech, freedom to follow the teachings of your faith, to determine what constitutes the teaching of your faith, the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, all could depend on, if we keep going this way, and where you live. I think most people in this country think that's unfair and unacceptable. We are, after all, the United States of America. Either the Constitution protects rights across the board, or it doesn't. The American people deserve to be a fully staffed Supreme Court of 9. No one, not one disabled and divided, but one that is able to rule on the great issues of the day. From separation of church and state, whether there's a threat to the right of abortion or safe and legal abortion. Police searches. It goes on. this is the last audience I have to list the concerns to. These are actual cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. We have to be sure that a fully functioning court is in a position to address the significant issues, and the geographic happenstance cannot fragment our national unity. The longer this high court vacancy remains, the more serious the problem will become, and the more we undermine the confidence in the courts. Back to that issue of confidence. The problem is compounded by turbulence, confusion, and uncertainty about our safety, our security, our liberty, our privacy. This is an uncertain time in the minds of many Americans. I need only have you look at the election process so far. And I'm not talking about one candidate. I'm talking about the process. A problem that will affect the future of this country, not only for our children, but for our grandchildren. We can't let this stand. And so I urge you to keep up the drumbeat, because I promise you, they know better. I've spoken to 17 of my colleagues on the other team. And because I've never violated a confidence, I will not say to the press who they are. But I mean it, I'm serious. We start off by saying, Joe, I know you're right. I know you're right. I've gone so far as to tell half a dozen of them, look, I'm not asking you to step out first, because I know it could cost you in your state. I'm not asking you to do that. But I'm asking you, if anybody steps out, step up. Step up. I think it's still possible. I think it's still possible we can have a hearing before this Congress adjourns sine die. I think we can resolve this. But the one thing I'm certain of, it will only be resolved if the pressure is unrelentingly kept up. If we continue to point out in the states of the senators that you know better. If we keep the drumbeat, not with a personal attack, but making the case why it's so important. So my closing comment to you is, stay at it. Nothing ever comes easy in this system, particularly right now. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of the members of the Senate know in what disregard the Senate is held at this moment. They know that they have to change it. I'm not asking any one of them to appear in the second edition of the Profiles in Courage. I mean it sincerely. But someone will, and when they do, I expect the rest to follow. And we don't need all of them. We don't need all of them. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all you do. I get paid big bucks to do my job. You don't. I know all of you wish you had my salary. I know that. But all kidding aside, you're among the most respected voices in the nation. You're recognized for your intellect, your integrity, and your devotion to the Constitution. So it matters. You keep writing, you keep speaking, you keep an unrelenting effort to get a hearing. Because if we get a hearing, we got the judge. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thanks. Thank all of you back in Virginia or Maryland, wherever the hell you are.
Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your dinners. We will have a final presentation in 15 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jacob Remus to the stage for the presentation of the David Carliner Public Interest Award.
Good evening. Thanks for sticking around for the main part of the show, I've been told. The David Carliner Award for Public Interest Law honors rising star lawyers who devote their careers to supporting, defending, and advocating for marginalized people in the United States and around the world. It recognizes and remembers David Carliner, who, among other things that I'm going to tell you, happens to have been my grandfather, which is why I'm standing here. David Carliner was a pioneering immigration lawyer here in Washington, was an ardent opponent of Jim Crow, both as an activist and later as a lawyer, when he remained an activist, and a staunch defender and creative proponent of home rule for the District of Columbia. Tonight, we're very pleased to recognize two extraordinary lawyers working to protect the rights of immigrants and refugees. The prize recognizes, in particular, 4 elements of which refugees and immigration is one. We look for innovative and creative lawyers who are working in civil rights, very broadly defined, civil liberties, immigration rights, and international human rights. And we give the winner a $10,000 prize. The finalist for this year's Carliner Award is Lindsay Kozlowski, who, driven by a dream of universal representation in immigration courts, last year founded the Immigrant Defenders Law Center in Los Angeles and has been doing a gangbusters job of growing that organization to provide representation to immigrants in immigration court at tremendous scale. The winner of this year's David Carliner Award for Public Interest Law is Blaine Bookey. Blaine is a leader in the movement to turn the phrase, "women's rights are human rights," from a slogan into actual law. From post-earthquake Haiti, where she built the Rape Accountability and Prevention Project at the Bureau des Avocats Internationaux, to her current position as co-legal director for Gender and Refugee Studies in San Francisco, she centers grassroots activists, organizers, and survivors. Her strategy is to combine legal advocacy for individuals seeking justice and public advocacy to transform the underlying social and political conditions that tolerate and encourage violence. The core of her work is to push the United States government to live up to its obligation to provide refuge and protection to women. She was crucial to a precedent-setting decision in which the Board of Immigration Appeals found a right to asylum based on domestic abuse. This victory set the stage for Blaine's work when, starting in 2014, large numbers of women and children started to arrive in the United States, refugees from violence in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. The United States government responded by calling many of these refugees economic migrants, locking them in family detention centers, and preparing to deport them. Working with local counsel, Blaine supported this plan by, again, elevating the voices of the women who she was working for. Getting them to tell their stories of surviving violence was crucial to winning them asylum. What is so exciting about Blaine Bookey's work is how she combines so many different types of advocacy. She represents individual asylum clients. She is a leader in policy advocacy coalitions in both Washington and California. She helps support human rights activists abroad. And she works to document and publicize human rights abuses in at least 3 languages, I should say, which is its own version of impressive. Throughout all of this, to quote mentors in Haiti, Blaine, quote, found ways to encourage people who had never had opportunities to speak out or to even learn to read, to maximize their potential as advocates, and here, speaking as myself, to also demand that governments, both abroad and here, hear those voices. The Carliner family at ACS are proud to present the 8th annual David Carliner Public Interest Award to Blaine Bookey.
Thank you. I'm a little shorter than our previous. Thank you to the ACS and to the Carliner family for this incredible honor. And thank you to Senator Warren and Vice President Biden for their inspiring remarks and their deep commitment to equality and the rights of those who are most marginalized among us. For over a decade, Aminta Cifuentes suffered daily beating and rape at the hands of her husband. The physical, the emotional scars she bears are daily reminders to her of the abuse. When she went to the police in Guatemala, they dismissed her pleas for help as marital problems. When she tried to escape, her abuser pursued her relentlessly. In a country with the 4th highest rate of killings of women in the world, where out of the more than 700 women who are killed each year, only 2% result in a conviction, Ms. Cifuentes reasonably feared for her life. Her choice, stay in Guatemala and face almost certain death, or leave her children and make the journey north. Ms. Cifuentes arrived in the United States only to encounter our Byzantine immigration system, from the immigration courts up to the highest executive levels, which hadn't yet made up their mind whether women like her deserve protection. For 20 years, there was a raging debate over whether women who are fleeing gender-based persecution, like domestic violence, sex trafficking, and honor killings, should have equal access to our asylum system when their lives are at risk. 3 separate attorneys general personally became involved in this issue without resolving it. An immigration judge ruled against Ms. Cifuentes, finding that even though he believed her, hers was just not the type of case covered by our asylum laws. But Ms. Cifuentes challenged the denial in her case. And it is because of her courage and the work of countless advocates that we finally have a published decision recognizing that women who suffer this sort of abhorrent violence in countries where patriarchy and impunity allow men to batter women without consequence may qualify for asylum in this country. Ruling in her case 2 years ago came at an opportune moment, as Jacob mentioned, as it coincided with this historic increase in Central American women and children coming to our southern border seeking protection, often from the same sort of violence that Ms. Cifuentes escaped. Many of these women have been granted asylum under the legal precedent established in her case. And many of them did so with the assistance of nonprofit and pro bono attorneys and law students, some of you who I know are here tonight. And it's her courage and your tireless generosity and advocacy have saved lives. But not all women have been met with the same treatment. Hundreds of asylum-seeking women are languishing in detention centers, treated like criminals while they await their day in court. And hundreds of women are going into court without a lawyer to represent them and guide them through the complexities of our asylum laws and a system that resists recognizing theirs as legitimate claims for asylum. Yet other women are being picked up in raids and deported to the very same conditions of violence they fled, never having a chance to present their claims in court. Our fear of the proverbial floodgates has blinded us to our obligations under domestic and international law to provide safety for the persecuted. Instead of acting consistent with our obligations, we have made misguided attempts to send messages of deterrence. We are at a crossroads as a nation. We can continue to employ these draconian policies and build walls, caring not what happens to those on the other side. Or we can follow in the footsteps of David Carliner and demand the legal, the moral, and the compassionate response to human suffering in the courts, in the streets, wherever our voice is needed to change the course of history, to protect those fleeing atrocious violations of rights, not jailing and expeditiously deporting them to their very likely deaths. I feel privileged to be able to do this work and my small part to carry on the legacy of David Carliner on behalf of women and others fleeing persecution. And I dedicate this award to all of the refugees I have worked with over the years who have given me this privilege of dedicating my life to ensure that they, free from violence, can choose how to live theirs. Thank you.
Now, please join us in welcoming to the stage ACS Board Chair Cliff Sloan.
Wow, what an evening and what a start to this convention. My name is Cliff Sloan, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as the chair of the ACS Board of Directors, a group that, like ACS itself, is drawn from all parts of the legal profession: plaintiffs' firms, defense firms, unions, corporations, law school faculties, law school student bodies, public interest organizations. And we all know that we stand on the shoulders of all of those who, over the past 15 years, have built ACS into the force that it is today and into the force that we see tonight. I want to thank Vice President Biden and Senator Warren for joining us tonight and for their powerful comments. They are true progressive champions helping to lead the country to a better place. And their remarks and their exhortations highlight the fact that the work of ACS, the work of everybody in this room, has never been more important than it is today. And it has never been more important than it will be in the days and weeks and months ahead in these tumultuous times and critically important times. Now, as Caroline mentioned, we have many people here from our chapters around the country, our lawyer chapters and our law student chapters. You are the core and the backbone of our organization. We appreciate your being here tonight, and we appreciate all that you do. And tonight, I have the pleasure of announcing a new ACS initiative. Today, we have launched the Board of Academic Advisors, and this has been created to establish even closer ties between the world of scholarship and important ACS activities on a range of issues, including progressive constitutional principles and sound approaches to statutory interpretation and regulatory interpretation at this critical juncture. And I'd like to ask the members of the Board of Academic Advisors, along with my colleagues on the ACS Board of Directors and the ACS Board of Advisors, to stand and be recognized, and let's give them a round of applause. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank the hardworking ACS staff, the best staff in the country, for their commitment, dedication, and effectiveness. Without them, we would not have had this evening tonight. Without them, we would not have this tremendous convention that we're going to have over the next couple of days. And most importantly, without them, we would not be able to do the work that we are doing day in and day out on behalf of progressive legal values. Now, finally, as this amazing evening draws to a close, I have a favor to ask of you. As you all know, ACS depends on your support so that it can perform its important mission. And with your programs on your chairs tonight, there was a donation form and envelope. And I would just ask you to please consider what is at stake. Consider what has been discussed tonight. And open your hearts and your wallets and your checkbooks and your credit cards And please join me in making a donation to ACS tonight. You can give the envelope to any of the ACS staffers that you see here, or we really appreciate it. So thank you again. Have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow.
Please consult your program to find our program schedule for Friday and Saturday. On behalf of the ACS Board, we thank you for your attendance at tonight's dinner and your continued support of